Welcome to Wake the Herd. I'm your host, Doug Warren. Today we're going to travel down to Charleston, South Carolina and talk to a man who is known as the Southern Avenger. His name is Jack Hunter. Jack's been producing his popular Southern Avenger video podcasts for a number of years now, and today his YouTube channel has received over 2 million views. You can find Jack's videos and columns as part of TAC TV at the American Conservative Magazine website. Jack also assisted Rand Paul with his book, The Tea Party Goes to Washington, which was released by Center Street in February 2011. We caught up with Jack fresh off his trip to Wisconsin, where he took part in a Campaign for Liberty rally in the Badger State. How was your trip this weekend to Wisconsin, up to Yankee Country?
Well, I was invited by the Wisconsin Campaign for Liberty to speak at their state conference. I'd never been to Wisconsin. I enjoyed myself while I was there. They were great hosts. It was an encouraging turnout, an encouraging number of speakers, what they had to say, and we're definitely heading in the right direction per Wisconsin's example.
Okay. When the Tea Party got rolling, I wanted to ask you when this new version of the Tea Party, it was inspired, of course, by the Boston Tea Party. When did this new version of the Tea Party really kind of get rolling? Because I think sometimes that gets kind of clouded here in the history of the last 4 or 5 years.
Well, the concept of the modern Tea Party, in which, today we're upset at our government, we want to protest against our government, really we saw that with the Ron Paul campaign in 2008. In Boston, at Faneuil Hall, they held what they called a second Boston Tea Party. And it was basically a Ron Paul money bomb. A number of events were held like that, but the popular Tea Party that we recognize today was really April 15th, 2009. Now, its beginnings were in the Ron Paul money bomb, but it's grown larger than that. It's not just Ron Paul people. There's a lot of Sarah Palin fans in the Tea Party. I always like to say that the Tea Party is basically the talk radio audience that is finally seeing beyond Republicans good, Democrats bad, and that sort of partisan nonsense. But yeah, I think that's the beginnings of it. And, this past tax day, we didn't see the same size rallies we did in 2009, but the presence of the Tea Party and their influence is undoubtedly there. If you don't believe me, ask some of the Republicans who got their heads handed to them in the midterm election. And it's going to be a big influence and a mover and shaker going into 2012, believe me. And that's the importance of the Tea Party movement, that in a bipartisan way it holds our politicians' feet to the fire. That's very important.
Yeah, is this in a way, I'm going to be 40 this year. I don't know how old you are. I'm assuming...
I'm 36, so
okay,
I'm not too far behind
you.
you.
The same age. In our lifetime, as far as third-party movements go, other than, of course, the financed effort by Ross Perot, his self-financed effort by Ross Perot in '92, is this maybe the biggest movement towards a third party, I guess, so to speak? I don't know. It's not a third party, but is this the biggest movement that we've seen maybe in our lifetime?
Yes, absolutely, without question. For how many years have conservatives, or better yet, conservative Republicans, been talking about we're going to limit government, we're going to get back to the Constitution? It's been nothing but campaign rhetoric for as long as I've been alive, because the government keeps getting bigger no matter which administration sits in the White House. If Republicans are in control of the entire government in D.C., government gets bigger than hell, per George W. Bush's example, in the early part of his term when we controlled the House, Senate, and the executive branch. For the first time, grassroots conservatives are seeing beyond that nonsense. I mentioned earlier that the Tea Party is basically the talk radio audience. Well, what have those national talk radio hosts done with that audience for years? Shepherded that populist anger back into the Republican machine. Talk radio hosts would tell their audience, well, I know Mitch McConnell and John Boehner and those guys, haven't been perfect in the past, but damn it, we got to beat the Democrats this time around, so let's rally around the Republican Party. Well, the Tea Party is the exact opposite of that. Yeah. If you're not serious about wanting to cut spending, if you voted for TARP or the bailouts, you're out of there. They don't care if there's an R next to your name. And that is the beauty of the Tea Party. It is the biggest movement, as you said, in the sense that for the first time ever, we have enough people en masse serious about really limiting government, really reducing spending, and really getting back to the Constitution in a way that not only the Democrats but the Republican Party is not going to like, because we're going to cast out any posers. So, yeah, it's huge. It's here. It's real. It's here to stay, and I'm very encouraged by it. It's a wonderful thing.
Yeah. Do you like the way that I'm just assuming you don't. This is kind of an obvious question. Do you like the way that the not only the liberal media, the MSNBCs and the CNNs of the world have portrayed the Tea Party, but even to a certain extent how Fox has portrayed the Tea Party, and in my opinion, they've kind of tried to, along with the parties themselves, steer this movement back onto their to the reservation, so to speak.
Well, you know, the people at Fox, and let's not forget that the same Fox that me as a Ron Paul supporter in 2008 was sort of ticked off at on a regular basis now hosts, you know, Judge Andrew Napolitano and John Stossel. So the whole game's changed, even within the establishment. But the GOP machine, the Republican establishment, Fox News, people like that, of course they want to latch on to this movement. You're going to see a Republican election here. We've got the first debate coming up here this week in which every Republican candidate is going to say, look at me, I'm a Tea Partier. Mitt Romney is going to say he's a Tea Partier. Newt Gingrich and Tim Pawlenty are going to say they're Tea Partiers. The question is, will the Tea Party believe them? Will some of them? Sure. Will all of them? Hell no. Will a sizable portion of them not believe these imposters? Quite probably, and that's the whole point. Of course, the Republican establishment, whether expressed through the politicians or outlets like Fox News in some instances, are going to try to latch on to this movement, just like they've latched onto the word conservative for years. It makes sense politically for them to do so. That doesn't mean that the Tea Party itself is necessarily going to buy into it. That's the big question.
Yeah, okay. I would agree with that. The two big things that have appealed to me about Ron Paul from day one, and I really started to learn about him being up here in Michigan really back in 2006. I began to hear about him through some online reading and hearing him interviewed more than once on the Alex Jones program. The two things that really stick out to me and have appealed to me about him since day one, and his son too, Rand Paul, are the fact that they are going after the Federal Reserve, the private central bank, as well as talking openly about scaling back what I term as the Pentagon's international offense and turning it back into a true national defense. And also, one other thing that always comes to mind too is the war on drugs, which it's actually, you know, a war on the Constitution and civil liberties and all that. Those are the three things that really appeal to me, and I think that's what kind of grabs people's attention about these two and this movement, which is certainly different from what the establishment has been telling us for, you know, the better part of the last 70 years.
Well, it's different because it's real.
Yeah. If
you go back and look at old right figures like Robert Taft, or look at what some of the older conservatives like Russell Kirk or Richard Weaver on the libertarian side, Murray Rothbard, Ludwig von Mises, F.A. Hayek, all those people addressed root causes. Today, what we call conservatism, or the American right, is a bunch of Republican hacks arguing over trivial crap that sort of satisfies the base that does nothing to address root causes. How many Republicans out there are jumping up and down about ACORN, Planned Parenthood, defunding NPR? Sure, yeah, we need to defund all that, but what does that have to do with our national debt? How's that going to save us $1.5 trillion in a deficit this year? The beauty of a Ron Paul or his son Rand Paul in talking about the Federal Reserve, which prints money, which devalues the dollar, or that we borrow money from China, or talking about a foreign policy in which we borrow money from China to do things all over the world that are to the detriment of this country, or even if they do get into the federal war on drugs, which even the late William F. Buckley admitted causes more problems and costs us more in lives and dollars than it's worth fighting. Yeah, those are all root causes, and that's what makes them genuine conservatives. That's where their message ties into the Tea Party. Are the Tea Party going to be satisfied with Karl Rove telling them that if they vote for this Republican, they won't have gay marriage? Well, yeah, that worked in 2004 with the Republican base, but if that same Republican is for TARP, or the bailouts, or does it want to audit the Federal Reserve? Is that going to work this time around? I say no. I say the Tea Party is going to hold their feet to the fire and say we're not falling for that crap again. And Ron Paul and his son Rand Paul now have a lot to do with influencing our politics in that direction, no doubt about it.
Yeah. What are some of the, or who are some of the other folks that you've come in contact with, maybe either on the national or the state level, politicians that is, who are legitimately part of this movement and they're not just posers?
Well, Justin Amash is one of the first that comes to mind, a young congressman. I think he just turned 31 years old there from Michigan.
Yeah.
He is a real deal Ron Paul Republican. I like Barry Goldwater Republican because that's basically what Ron Paul is, and I am too.
Yeah, you said Barry Goldwater. Your phone broke up? I'm assuming you said Barry Goldwater.
Barry Goldwater, that's right. Because, I mean, that philosophy is basically what Ron Paul espouses. I do too, as does Justin Amash. You're asking me about different figures. What amazes me when I go to CPAC or these Campaign for Liberty events are the people all over the country who are inspired to run for office because of Ron Paul, might win because of Ron Paul. Justin Amash is a good example, as is Ron's son. This movement is growing. It's centered around the figure that is Ron Paul, just like we once had Goldwater Republicans and Reagan Republicans, and we should make no apologies about that. But it is growing beyond that, and it will become an enduring force in the conservative movement and the Republican Party. Things are trending in our direction, both because we're making that happen, because our numbers and influence is growing, and also because the political environment has changed and has shifted in our direction. Every dire prediction made by a Ron Paul or similar-minded figures like Peter Schiff or Judge Andrew Napolitano and all these people are coming true. We are out of money. We have an extended global empire that is unsustainable. Our military overstretch is completely ridiculous, and we can't pay for it. All these things, these chickens are coming home to roost, and the liberty message is coming out on top with all the right answers.
Yeah. One question I wanted to ask is I enjoy your Southern Avenger takes, and it's something that I don't know how long you've been doing it, but I enjoy all of them that I see, and then your takes, and I can see why, looking at some of these that you consider Pat Buchanan as one of your idols. I am a Buchanan fan too. I don't always agree with him, but the thing about him that I do like is that he's honest, and he is a true conservative, and especially when it comes to areas like foreign policy. Is there room for liberals in this Tea Party movement, is my question.
I think there are some people who are disenchanted with Barack Obama, who voted for him because they were fed up with George W. Bush, and rightfully so. They'd hoped for some sort of change from the Bush administration, and they're not getting it. What they're seeing is Bush 2.0. The only difference is this guy's even spending more money than the last one. If you were a leftist and you were upset about the infringement upon civil liberties, things like the Patriot Act, if you were upset about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, well, you've got a president that has either maintained or expanded each of those policies, and once again is spending money we don't have to do it. So, yeah, I think there's some people on the left, or probably more accurately, independents that could go either way in any election that are certainly part of the Tea Party. You asked about Pat Buchanan. Pat Buchanan was my Ron Paul when I was 20 years old. A lot of these young college students today are inspired by Ron Paul, and I am as well. But to me, I became a supporter of Ron Paul because I saw it as an extension of what I supported when I supported Pat Buchanan for president in 96 and 2000. Here was a conservative Republican that the establishment did not like. The neoconservatives hated Pat Buchanan, and the feeling was mutual. Yeah. For years, as anybody talked about on the conservative side, bringing our troops home, not being involved around the world, the neocons would say, oh, well, there's that Buchananite tendency within the Republican Party. When you read a book by Pat Buchanan called A Republic, Not an Empire, I'm hearing echoes of Ron Paul. I had the chance to ask him in an interview one time, and he said, yeah, absolutely, it's the same language, it's the same thing. So, yeah, I'm a fan of Pat Buchanan, not only because he's genuine, but more importantly, he's right on the issues. We talked earlier about Ron and Rand Paul and that type of Republican addressing root causes, not the sort of trivial nonsense to satisfy the Republican base. Well, Pat Buchanan is the same kind of figure, and yeah, he's one of my heroes, not only in his politics but as a writer. I think he's one of the best pundits on the right out there.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I always have enjoyed his writings, especially as this Tea Party movement increases. He's becoming, for people who really do pay attention and they don't just listen to sound bites and people bashing him as a relic of the past or try to always tie.
Oh, hell, you can talk about a relic of the past. Look at Rick Santorum and Newt Gingrich that are running for office this year. In fact, if anything, right. Pat Buchanan, who was talking about illegal immigration in the mid-'90s And all the Republicans, including guys like Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum, were saying he was a nativist and a racist. Well, now every Republican says they're against illegal immigration. He was talking about our lopsided trade policies. He was talking about an out-of-control foreign policy. Who was right and who was wrong? Pat Buchanan was right, so the so-called dinosaur relic proved them all wrong. He was talking about these issues before they were issues.
Yeah, I completely agree. We're on the same page with that. I have a lot of continuing on the question of is there room for liberals or independents in the Tea Party movement? I have a lot of friends who are African American, and when I talk about the Pauls or when I talk about Buchanan, not all of them, but to be honest, the vast majority of them, I'm sure you run into a lot of these people too. When they hear terms like states' rights, it's like a four-letter word. And, for many of them, some of my closest friends grew up during Jim Crow in the South. Their parents certainly did, and they've lived with that legacy and the lessons from their parents. So when they hear the term states' rights, it repels them, despite all of the things that we just talked about that are unlike traditional, or at least the current major conservative movement. How do we promote the Pauls and promote Buchanan and promote this Tea Party movement and do so that we can convince these people that states' rights today does not equal George Wallace, it doesn't equal the White Citizens Council? You understand what the question is.
Two things about that. I've met more black conservatives in my entire life since this Tea Party movement started happening. Just speaking to these events, going to these events, go to any Ron Paul event or Campaign for Liberty event. It's not all white, believe me. In fact, your average Republican, go to a Mitt Romney event and then go to a Ron Paul event and see how many more minorities you find. It'll definitely be at the Ron Paul event.
Yeah.
Same is true of the Tea Parties. Despite the left's caricature, I mean, I can't tell you, I've met countless black conservatives, not just, fellow black Americans, but others.
Yeah.
It just happens all the time. As far as the states' rights and 10th Amendment, decentralism and all that, you have to start where people are. I don't know many black Americans. I live here in South Carolina where 30% of the state is African American. I don't know many of my black neighbors who support the fact that we have a federal war on drugs in which their sons can get in trouble at a young age and get thrown in jail for simple possession, or at least establish a record. I don't know any of them that think that. Now, those same people who might recoil at the very concept of states' rights think that in California, where there's de facto nullification of federal drug laws, that those minorities should be thrown in jail, even though California law now protects them against federal law. I would dare say that most of our fellow black Americans in any state would say, no, we agree with the California 10th Amendment states' rights position. Correct. Now, if you get them to start there, then you can explore all these other issues, if you see what I'm getting at. Rand Paul, who I've had a collaboration with on his book, got in trouble right after the Republican primary, where Rachel Maddow on MSNBC was trying to say that his advocacy for property rights meant he wanted to go back to Jim Crow and separated lunch counters and all that kind of stuff. Well, one of the most important Supreme Court decisions was in 2006 here recently, Kelo versus New London. What was that about? It said, the federal court said that the concept of eminent domain could be so broadly defined as if you have a house and the local government decides that a shopping mall would be a better tax base than your house, they can get rid of your house and build a shopping mall. Well, that is a radical definition of the concept of eminent domain. Who opposed that? A lot of conservatives opposed that because it was an attack on private property rights, and as did the NAACP. Why would the NAACP oppose that decision? Because there's a lot of poor black Americans who, their houses that they've lived in for generations could be swept away because somebody could make more money with a shopping mall. Does that mean the NAACP wants to go back to separated lunch counters because they're choosing local control over federal control and defying the federal court's decision and opposing it? No. So you see what I'm getting at. Start with where they are with issues they agree with and work backwards. That's my method anyway.
Yeah, that is kind of what I try to do. When I and the point that I make, and I knowing that you and I are in the same generation, I have always sensed that when it comes to race, with people like us, people in our generation, we just don't think about it as much. We're not as preoccupied with it. I wrote a column on my website it was a few months ago now. I'll have to send it to you, and I always would like your critique on those kinds of things, because I think it might be right up your alley, where I talked about how our generation is different because, for instance, I used an example of the old the Run DMC song that they did with the band Anthrax, Bring the Noise.
Bring the Noise, yeah.
You probably remember seeing that on
I've seen
MTV
actually both
like
groups live, but go ahead.
Right. So to us, it's just it's like it's like telling somebody 100 years ago that there's a space shuttle today. It's completely foreign to us, this thing about race. And if there was ever anybody who wanted to bring Jim Crow back, there's no way that our generation and the generations after us would stand for it. We've already crossed that bridge, is my point.
It's a generational issue for sure. The younger you go, it's just not an issue. I would add homosexuality the same way.
Right.
The critique of homosexuality in our society, that it is just generational and older people, their tastes and habits, is absolutely right. I say that as a traditional conservative who voted for Pat Buchanan twice. Mm-hmm. That's absolutely true. As a Christian, do I think the concept of gay marriage is sort of goofy? Sure I do. But do I think that gay people are evil or there's something wrong? No, I don't. I'm 36 years old. I've got gay friends and grown up around it all my life. The same is true of race relations. Younger people, look, being a black man or a white man or a black woman or a white woman in this country means something. The mistake that extremists on both sides make, if you're an anti-racist, you say that it means absolutely nothing. If you're a hardcore racist, you say that race means absolutely everything. Well, both are foolish. Does the fact that Barack Obama grew up in this country black have something to do with his identity and his upbringing and who he is? Of course it does. It just doesn't have everything to do with what he is, and it has absolutely nothing. That's, I think, where most Americans are. Yeah. In the past, everything would be based on race, the way we structured our society, where you could eat, how you could vote. It's not like that anymore, and it's because it just matters less to younger generations, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah. When these conversations about the GOP and the Democrats come up, especially now when we're talking about budget cuts and these large debts and things, while they do not talk about the elephant in the room, such as the military-industrial complex and the Federal Reserve, those two large twin elephants, Siamese elephants, I guess.
Well, they're worried about NPR, the $1.2 million we spent on that.
Right. The one thing that does often comes up is something that I think is the GOP is in danger of having come back and bite them, is when they start talking about cutting the social safety net. And we're kind of seeing a backlash of that in Wisconsin. And we're starting to see it, quite frankly, here in Michigan as well. Is there, in your mind, a place for a social safety net on the federal level?
Social not safety on the federal net that level.
Was constructed. Okay.
No, not on the federal. Well, I mean, there is in the sense that it exists, and we have to deal with the practical reality. Is there a place for it permanently, forever and ever? No, we can't afford it. We're seeing that right now. Paul Ryan's proposal that's so controversial right now basically takes Medicaid and sends it back as block grants to the states, which is preferable to what we have, but just to show you the ineffectiveness of that plan, what everybody's freaking out over, Obama's proposed projections for everything he's promised to spend gives us in 10 years a $41 trillion national debt. What Paul Ryan's proposing right now with his so-called path to prosperity gives us, according to the CBO numbers, a $23 trillion national debt in 10 years. That's what people are arguing about. We have a $14 trillion national debt right now that's completely unsustainable, and the big debate is should we raise the debt ceiling again. Mm-hmm. The idea that entitlements will be solvent for forever, and you're seeing when you watch your TV screen, all these people at town halls raising hell about Paul Ryan and this plan and all that. You talked about generational differences earlier, about race and issues like homosexuality and the like. Well, this is the same thing. I'm 36 years old. I would cut my losses and opt out today on Social Security and Medicare. I don't know many people my age that don't share the same thing. Right. So, and these proposals with Paul Ryan, Rand Paul has his proposal, don't affect anybody 55 and under. So there's a cutoff point. It's not like you're taking things that have been promised to people. These should be delivered to the people they're promised to, Social Security, Medicare, and the like. But it's not going to be there forever. And, if it goes completely bankrupt and these people are, raising hell or whatever, well, then they learn their lesson the hard way instead of trying to do something to fix it right now.
Is it still unsustainable if we, again, were to scale back our international offense in the war on drugs, those kinds of things?
Well, I mean, you could make the argument that we could fund it longer. If we weren't spending $3 trillion in Iraq, we could spend a few trillion at home. That's Barney Frank's argument with Obamacare. He said if we didn't spend $1 trillion in Iraq, we could spend $1 billion on Obamacare. And I always tell my conservative friends, well, should our answer to Barney Frank be, no, sir, we should spend trillions of dollars overseas, but never at home? Or should it be, we don't have trillions of dollars to spend, period. We don't need to be spending it. And unfortunately, for half the Republican Party, if not more, their argument is, no, Barney, we need to be spending trillions overseas, but never on our own people. That's a crappy argument. Yeah. So, these things are unsustainable to the extent that we could save money by scaling back overseas. Of course, that's true, but I don't think the answer is to throw money on top of bad money here at home. I think we should reduce our debt, get rid of these deficits, and get back to a genuinely limited constitutional republic. Now, that's more radical in practice than it is in theory, but the closer we can get to that ideal, the better off we all will be, and the more free we'll be. We'll have the fruit of our own labor, we'll have our own money, and we can make these decisions. We'll have more money to take care of grandma and grandpa instead of relying on the federal government, which squanders it. So.
Right. Yeah, it is kind of exciting. Well, it's more than kind of. It is exciting to see this movement back towards limited government, and it's interesting to see how over the last couple of years, especially how both parties have tried to come back to the Tea Party's way of thinking. And you brought up earlier the issue, the Fox News example, where now, because of this movement, they have to put people like Andrew Napolitano and John Stossel on their networks, and actually Napolitano, I think, will eventually have a primetime slot on the main channel.
Well, that's right. As much as we got upset at Fox during the Ron Paul campaign, rightfully so, their bottom line is the bottom line. We know from Jessica Yellen, who worked for CNN about 2005 or 6, she admitted that many of the corporate executives for all the TV cable outlets told the reporters to frame the Iraq war in a positive way because it was good for advertising dollars. So that's not really journalism. It's, corporate, I don't know what you want to call it. It's a joke.
Sounds like something Joseph Goebbels would have said.
Right, but that's their bottom line is the bottom line. So in 2008, if you're the Republican channel, which Fox is, and you got this Ron Paul guy messing up the Republican narrative of we need to bomb the hell out of everybody all the time and we're not going to ask any questions about it, of course they're going to bash him. Now that it makes more sense and it's profitable to be more Tea Party oriented or libertarian or traditional conservative and throw Judge Napolitano on your channel, or John Stossel, and for Sean Hannity to interview Ron Paul every other week now and treat him like a regular human being instead of a pariah, and to suck up to Rand Paul, and so on and so on, that's a bottom line decision because there's an audience for it, if you see what I'm getting at. Yeah. We put too many conspiracies sometimes that there's, this political cabal that's trying to no, they're worried about dollars and cents and whatever's popular. If Ron Paul became president of the United States, Fox would become the Ron Paul channel because the entire Republican Party and conservative movement would trickle down politics. It'd be Ron Paul's party, just like the Democrats are Obama's party and the Republicans were Bush's party. That's just the way it works.
Yeah. Boy, I wonder what would happen to MSNBC if that ever happened.
They'd freak out. They're the Obama channel. Hell, what was their slogan after the thing? See what change feels like?
Yeah.
I mean, it's so transparently obvious.
Yeah.
Lean forward. Give me a break.
Being that you consider Ric Flair as one of your idols as well.
Yes.
How do you feel about Jesse Ventura?
I think Jesse Ventura's interesting. Are you talking about the ring or this whole political thing he got into later on?
Well, I guess the whole thing. It's such an interesting story. Yeah, you and I watched him as kids on WWF every week as a commentator and a wrestler, and we sure as hell didn't think at the time that this guy was going to end up being governor anywhere.
Well, that's right. Jesse Ventura, when I was a kid, I've been watching pro wrestling since I was 8 and never grown up, I guess.
Yeah, right.
He was one of the guys. You had superstar Billy Graham, who was sort of this flashy tie-dye wearing guy. And the three guys who really ripped him off the most were Dusty Rhodes and the way he talked, Jesse Ventura, and, of course, Hulk Hogan, who would admit that. But Jesse Ventura was this colorful wrestler. I liked him when I was a kid. He was a heel, which is the bad guy in wrestling lingo. He had a diamond embedded in his chin. Of course, he got hurt, and then he was an announcer with Vince McMahon and Gorilla Monsoon on Saturday night's main event for all those years. But When he got into politics, I guess that was in the mid-'90s when he won the governor's chair there in Minnesota.
Yeah.
I thought it was exciting to see an insurgent third-party person win. I agreed with a lot of his platform. I disagreed with some of his platforms, but he was a populist, anti-establishment guy, and I thought it was healthy for American politics. Now, post his governorship, I still agree with a lot of the things he has to say, but he's sort of taken on this conspiracy theory thing. That's his new gig. And that's cool. It's fun to talk about conspiracy theories, but as far as having a serious political career now, I think he's sort of attached himself to the conspiracy stuff, which is fine. But I think politically, in a national sense, I think he's pretty much finished. I could be wrong, but that's just my take on Ventura.
Okay. Have you ever met Ric Flair?
I've met Ric Flair a few times, and more importantly, he called me on my 30th birthday. It was a surprise orchestrated by my girlfriend at the time. I was taking a nap, and the phone rings, and is this Jack Hunter? I said, yes, sir. He said, this is the Nature Boy Ric Flair, and you talk about you imagine what a 12-year-old girl is like when she meets Justin Bieber. Well, that's what that phone call pretty much went like with me and Ric Flair.
Yeah, did you get to record that conversation?
No, I didn't know it was happening.
Yeah.
That would have been illegal anyways unless I told him about it.
Yeah, unless you told him, of course.
I did save his phone number, and I hid it behind a picture. I probably should leave it there. I won't say which picture. But just in case some drunk friend on some wild evening got a hold of my phone and decided to call Ric Flair, I took it out of my phone and wrote it down and saved it. So.
How long do you still write for the American Conservative? I know you do your blog.
Yeah. Absolutely. No, I write for the American Conservative. I contribute twice weekly to the website, amconmag.com, and I write for the print magazine here and there. That's my primary gig, I guess, what a lot of people associate me with. And, of course, that was a magazine founded by Pat Buchanan, so that sort of brings my politics full circle.
Right.
I'm a part-time host for Mike Church on Sirius XM satellite radio. I'm a weekly guest on the Michael Savage program, his nationally syndicated show. I'm a regular guest on Freedom Watch with Judge Andrew Napolitano. And I'm a columnist for the Charleston City Paper here in Charleston, South Carolina, which is the local liberal rag. I'm the token conservative, and a local host here in Charleston, South Carolina. I think that about covers it. Oh, and I helped Rand Paul write his book, The Tea Party Goes to Washington.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Was that when you became acquainted with Rand? Was during the writing of that book, or how did that come about?
I'd interviewed Rand on the radio before that. I've met his father countless times. I introduced his dad 3 times during the South Carolina primaries in 2008. Both Rand and his father are familiar with me due to my YouTube videos, which you can now find at the American Conservative. Rand was interested in writing a book, and I received a call from my friend Tom Woods, who was asked to participate, and he was busy writing Rollback at the time. He suggested my name, and one thing led to another. About a week later, I was in Kentucky for about a month, riding up and down the road with then candidate Paul, and discussing the book. And I helped him put together. I think it turned out to be a pretty good book.
Yeah. Did you have any other books in the works right now? Anything?
I'm working on one right now, but I'll keep the information to myself.
Right, I understand. I know how that works.
It's not about Ric Flair. That'll be the 3rd book.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Has there been a book written about Ric Flair? I'm sure.
He has a biography, and so I want to see a movie about Ric Flair, but that's just me.
Who would play him?
I don't know. That's a good question. He had that episode of Eastbound and Down where Will Ferrell was basically doing a Ric Flair impression. For those of you who've seen that out there.
Oh yeah, that would be something. I haven't seen that. I'll have to go check that out. Well, Jack, I really appreciate your time. I was hoping this would be the kind of conversation it turned out to be. That's how I became acquainted with you too, was through your YouTube videos, and then of course on Facebook, which is another beast in all of itself. I look forward to talking to you again, and I really appreciate your time, and have fun down there in South Carolina. You guys haven't been getting hit by those tornadoes yet, have you?
Not in our neck of the woods. I know Rand, out there in Kentucky, there's been some bad news out there, but not here. But I appreciate being with you today, and I enjoyed the conversation as well.
All right, Jack. Thanks a lot. We'll talk to you soon.
Take care.
Yep. Bye-bye. Wake the Herd is a production of LansingandBeyond.com. Listen to all of our program archives and read our blogs, news, and commentary at LansingandBeyond.com.